Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Well, how good would it be if we could track down Margaret McLaren? Hello, Margaret.
Hello, how are you?
Doing very, very well indeed. You've got Neil. The other voice you'll hear is Rob. I was talking to someone the other day, Rob, and they said, would you be interested in chatting to Margaret McLaren? And I think the impression was I wouldn't know who Margaret was. And I said, yeah. A complete fluke that we caught up because we have a mutual friend.
Yes, we do. Yeah, through my son, Jesse.
Yes. So Margaret's son lives with someone who contacted me about their music career, and here we are.
That is marvellous. Hey, Margaret, do you ever get sick of listening to that song?
I don't listen to it very much, but no, not really. No, it was good memories, great memories, yeah.
How did it happen that you got to be in the Stone recording studio as an Australian music icon?
Well, the first band I was ever joined when I was just 16, believe it or not, went on to become John's backing band whenever he was in Melbourne. And then as other bands around Australia split up, we started travelling with him. So we worked pretty much full-time for him from about 1972, 73. And this was a little project that he'd had that he wanted to put together. So he asked me if I was interested in doing it, and we went into Festival Studios in Sydney and recorded it. It originally was going to be Soul Shake. The B-side was going to be the one that we were going to put out as a record. But when we'd finished both songs, we preferred Mockingbird, so Mockingbird was the one that we went with. So that's how it all happened.
I'm going to horrify Rob with the next sentence. I actually did a little bit of research during the week. We don't normally do that. We normally just wing it, as you've no doubt worked out by now. But it was originally, it's obviously a nursery rhyme from years ago, back when Rob was a kid. And then it became something of a boppy tune in the early 1960s with, am I saying Charles Nanez Fox? Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And then Johnny performed it on Sing, Sing, Sing with another Australian singer as early as 1963 or 64. So it was a song that was associated with him.
I actually didn't know that until well after. I didn't realise that he'd recorded it earlier. But anyway, I was glad to be part of it. It was great.
I don't know if it was ever released as a single, though. I think it was just, you know, how they used to lip sync on a TV show, and I can't remember her name. But yeah, so I don't know that he ever recorded it and released it, but certainly he'd performed it before.
I think you could see it on YouTube, actually. Del someone, her name was.
That's right,
yes. It popped up this morning because when I said, we've got... Do you remember the song Mockingbird to someone next to you? Yeah, I remember that. And we Googled it and they said, Delson. I said, no, that's not the one. And then we found a bit, dig a bit deeper and find Margaret McLaren. Hey, let's go back to the earlier then. If you're talking late 60s, early 70s, and a 16-year-old girl at the front of a band, that wouldn't have been common. And I don't know what the family life was like with you, but there wouldn't have been a lot of parents would be too keen on their 16-year-old daughter fronting a rock band in that era. How did that part happen? I
still shake my head at how amazingly trusting my parents were. They took a shine to in particular, the guitar player in the band, Kevin Kerr, and his wife, Maureen, and they sort of became my chaperones. And, you know, Mum and Dad just said, well, if this is what you want to do it. Leaving school was interesting because clearly, because we were working 7 nights a week. We did all the Quarton hotels around Melbourne. And I just couldn't study and sing 7 nights a week as well. So I had to front up to the school and tell them I was leaving. And Mum and Dad trusted me. Thank goodness they did. It was wonderful.
We better get a shout out to the school. What school?
Oh, that was MLC in Kew.
Oh, okay.
Goodness gracious, that would have been a very interesting conversation there.
My son went to Trinity just round the corner. I know exactly how that conversation would have gone.
Well, it was a conversation my parents said I had to have myself. They weren't going to go and do it for me. So I was sitting outside the principal's office, Mrs. McCarthy, and shaking like a leaf saying, well, I haven't quite finished Form 4 yet, which is the equivalent of, 8 or 9 now. And but I'm leaving.
Did you get the conversation? Now, you'll never amount to anything unless you finish school, Margaret. Did that happen?
Actually, no. She was quite supportive. I used to do a bit of singing at school as well, so they knew I had a voice. So, no, they were pretty good. They were supportive.
If only Mrs. McCarthy knew that in 2023 you would pinnacle in your career by talking to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show in Geelong. I mean, she would be shaking her head now, wouldn't she?
She probably would. She probably would.
Just a quick chat off. Margaret, a very interesting career. The song gave you some prominence and notoriety, but it pre that in the band and post that in the band, it was just a lot of hard work in a wonderful industry of breaking through music in Australia. So a lot of great memories, I imagine, outside of the Johnny O'Keefe connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I joined a band, an a cappella band actually, which is Voices Without Music, and they were called Vocomotion, and we had quite a strong following in Melbourne. We did the Lemon Tree Hotel in Carlton and the Park Royal on St Kilda Road and the Hyatt and quite a few other regular gigs, 4 or 5 a week. And then from those, because we were so versatile, we'd pick up a lot of private gigs and parties and corporate gigs and stuff, because we could just walk on stage with a guitar and sing. And it was a bit of a comedy thing too. A couple of the guys were pretty funny, and we picked up quite a bit of work, and that sustained me for over 15 years.
What sort of music were you playing in those days? What sort of original stuff, or were you doing covers?
It was all sort of rock and roll stuff, Lipstick on Your Collar and I can't think now, but yeah, lots of that sort of early 60s rock and roll. Yeah.
Margaret, there's a lot of performers, both male and female like you, that probably did a lot of the hard yards, and sometimes it was just the one song that was able to make a difference and get them a little bit more notoriety. Did you have other opportunities to record other music at that stage, or were you just happy working through the pub scene?
We did do a lot of recording back in those days. We put a cassette together that we'd sell at gigs, which was pretty popular. We actually went into Armstrong's studio or Metropolis studio and recorded a vocal version of Good Vibrations, which was quite an extraordinary thing to do. We spent a lot of money on it, a lot of time, and in the hope that we would get some airplay. But unfortunately, we just couldn't get anyone interested. But it's something I'm very glad I did. It was quite an extraordinary feat of music, with all voices and no instruments singing Beach Boys.
I don't know whether Jesse or Kyle mentioned some of the people that we've interviewed on this, but if we took out the bit, we visited Armstrong Studios, we wouldn't have anyone to speak to. It seemed like the absolute epicentre of music in Melbourne. It was,
yeah. We were lucky enough to have Ernie Rose and Sam C as our producer and director, and they were extraordinary. Like, for instance, if you can remember, in the Beach Boys version, they had an instrument called the theremin, which was that ooh, yeah. And our bass singer was quite an amazing whistler, and he whistled the part in the song. It just sounded perfect.
Wow. My kids, of course, referring to that song as the Good Guys song. When it came on the radio, the first time they heard actual Good Vibrations, my daughter yelled out from the back, said, the Good Guys song, which kind of diminishes its value in the music genre, I would have thought.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, someone obviously introduced you to Johnny O'Keefe, and in the, I guess, mid to late 60s, he would have come with a bit of a reputation as the wild one. Do you remember that first opportunity to perform with him?
I actually didn't know who he was.
Well, that was very much the Melbourne-Sydney thing, wasn't it?
And I'll bet your mum and dad were very happy to hear that.
Yeah, no, I had no idea. The guys in the band were, because they were all a lot older, and they were all very excited about the opportunity of working with him, and I'm sort of like, oh yeah, okay. And but we rehearsed, and the first show that we ever did with him, I'd actually lost my voice. So he wasn't impressed when he first met me, and I wasn't going on stage to do the show because I simply couldn't sing. So he was very grumpy with me. And anyway, we've got over that bridge and went on to do many years of singing together. So, yeah.
Because I guess for the listeners who are a little younger than Rob and I, and I guess you, Margaret, the whole sort of late 60s, whatever happened in Sydney might as well have been on the other side of the world compared with Melbourne, wasn't it? That was very much separate markets and separate artists. You wouldn't get together very often.
No, not really. Of course, he had the benefit of doing quite a few TV shows, Sing, Sing, and those sorts of things, which, of course, were all across Australia. But other than that, and of course, the many hits that he had, got played in Melbourne as well, or around the country as well. But he certainly wasn't as well known down here as he was in Sydney, because they had all the big leagues clubs too.
Yeah.
Huge venues, and which we eventually ended up working in, which was, a great experience. But I'd say he wasn't as well known. But I have to say, I was so young. He was well before my time.
Margaret, you sound very grounded, organised person. So you've got this notoriety. You go around performing in front of audiences. I imagine it's quite magnetic and even hypnotic for some. But there came a time where it stopped and life took on a normal path. What was the transition for you like to leave the industry, leave the crowds, leave the adulation?
It was good, actually. I was quite happy to, once Locomotion split up, and then I had the opportunity to go and work for an IT company, and I didn't even know how to turn a computer on at that stage. They were ever so patient and taught me, and it started off as a part-time thing and went to a full-time thing, and that's how I saw out my working career. Not with that one company, but then I went out as a contractor going into large companies like Coles and Telstra and NBN and all of those sort of things, working on their large projects as a project coordinator, which was basically the go-to person for anyone in the project. And so some of those projects were 300 and 400 people strong. And I was there, got a problem or something, go and see Margaret and she'll fix it for you.
That's a very interesting statement about going back to your school days, your education not completed as education experts say it should. You went off into this weird and wonderful industry, but then came back into an area where you'd think most of your peers were university educated, probably. Was it your going to the school of hard knocks? Was that really valuable for you?
Oh, I think it was my practicality, to be honest. I raised my 3 kids by myself. I had to sort of get things done and make things happen, and it was just common sense and the love of people. I love people, so I was surrounded by people from all over the world who were brought in to work on these projects, and it was just fascinating. I loved it.
The other thing, I actually work in a similar kind of world. I'm a change manager in my real world and work on large projects. And I was working on a project 5 years ago, and a chap was introduced to me as another member of the team, and he was introduced as Harvey Merrigan. And I've said, "You're not the same Harvey Merrigan that used to play football for Fitzroy, are you?" And he went, "Yeah." And he was quite embarrassed about it, and because he was a superstar in the footy. Was there ever an opportunity for you to walk into a meeting and go, "Well, actually, when I had my top 5 hit with Johnny O'Keefe, people would have fallen off their chairs, wouldn't they?"
Only once. One of my duties when I was at Coles was to organise some pretty large functions, as a thank you to the team that they'd reached a milestone and all that sort of stuff. And I did functions out at the Zoo and the Hyatt and Crown Casino. But one of the ones we did was at the Hard Rock Cafe. Mm-hmm. And only my immediate colleagues within the PMO, the Program Management Office, knew about my background. But I had a quiet little word to the people at the Hard Rock Cafe, and they had a live band there. And I explained who I was and said, would you mind if I got up and sang a couple of songs? But the guys in the band sent me a song list, and I picked 3 or 4. And then I just got up and sang in front of all these people. Well, they're yours, would you? The funniest thing I've ever done. I was very nervous because I hadn't sung for ages. But they were just sort of like, their eyes were popping out of their heads, and my God, our coordinator's up there singing rock and roll.
Because your real name and your stage name were the same, presumably?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you had a different name, you could slide under the radar. But I think I'm right in saying this, and if I'm not, I've completely mixed you up with someone else. I was listening to an evening program on a radio station in Melbourne, let's call it 3AW for the sake of argument, a number of years ago. And there was, I think it might have been Philip Brady was speculating upon the song, and a caller called Margaret rang in, and the question was asked, how do you seem to know so much? And you said, my surname's McLaren. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, that does sound.
I thought so. And yeah, so because presumably you walk down the street and you buy your groceries and all that sort of stuff, and there's Margaret. Yeah, no idea.
No one knew. No. I remember ringing Grubby because they were talking about Sunbury, which of course I got to do, and so I thought, I better ring in and tell them what went on and all that sort of stuff. So that was a bit of fun.
Yeah. Wow.
How's Sunbury? What was because you're obviously quite young, and the notoriety of the event sits in Australian music history. But what was it like there for a young girl?
It was amazing. Unfortunately, we had to sort of fly in, do the show, and fly out. But John went on stage just as the sun was setting, and Paul Hogan was the MC, and he's standing up on the stage saying, light a lighter for his particular brand of cigarettes, which I won't name.
Thank you. We do like doing the show.
Yeah, the whole hill just lit up with all these lights. It was quite extraordinary. But we were all really nervous because John was very thing about, he was going to wear a dinner suit, right? And we were going to wear suits and we kept saying, no, John, it's jeans and T-shirts, really. And the other thing he insisted on was doing Boop Boop Boop-a-Doo, which Thorpe had made his the year before.
Mm.
But John said, I recorded it before he did, and I'm going to do it. And we were actually really nervous that he just wouldn't take on at all. And they loved him. He had them eating out of his hand. It was extraordinary. And there again on YouTube, there's 3 or 4 clips from Sunbury, which is worth a look if you haven't seen them already. They're a bit of fun.
The one clip I do know of from Sunbury, and I think it might have been 73, I'm going to say, Graham Goebel, I had good fortune to chat with him back in the days of Mississippi, and he was playing Kings of the World, which I think is one of the greatest pieces of Australian music ever written. And he said the problem was it was so hot, the string section couldn't tune. They'd tune their violin and stuff out the back. They come out on stage and it'd be out of tune. And they made the string section wear shirts and ties. And you're thinking, got rocks in your head.
Yeah, well, as I say, we were there early evening, and we basically did the show and had to jump in cars and go back to the airport to be back in Sydney. So I didn't get to experience it like I would have liked to. But
at least it was close to the airport.
Pardon?
At least it was close to the airport.
Right. Yeah.
Margaret, as we get a little older, reflection is a word I love to use a lot as we reflect back on things we did in our life. I suppose quiet moments, reflection of your time in the Australian music industry, how does it sit with you?
Look, it sits well. It does sit well. I had some amazing experiences, met some amazing people. Didn't get to do a lot of shows with other big name artists because John was a big name in his own right. But we did do a tour very early days with John Farnham, or Johnny back in the day. And, I got to meet people like the Masters Apprentices and Ronnie Burns and Normie Rowe and all those guys that were all doing shows around the same time as we were. So, they were all really good experiences for me. I really enjoyed the time. I did.
Now, one thing we do need to put to bed, though, and this is us, standing up for you, Margaret. There's a lot of people out there who think that you and Johnny did Mockingbird as a cover version of the Carly Simon and James Taylor version. You actually recorded that before they did. Is that right?
We did. Yes, we did. It was interesting because I remember John flipping out one day when he heard the other version on the radio, and it's like, where's that come from? Who are these people? What are they doing our song for? And he actually went to the Australian Broadcasting Commission and said to them, look, we did this first and we should get equal airplay, which they agreed to. And fortunately for us, they preferred the slightly up-tempo version to the Carly Simon version. and ultimately it became a hit. But yeah, no, that's exactly as it happened. We certainly recorded it first. Or it certainly hit the Melbourne or the Australian market before the Carlyans.
Well, though I can vividly remember the two of them being played, not simultaneously, but at the same time in Australian music, and it was. I don't know of any other cases that are strong in my memory, but that was definitely a case that you regularly heard both played on a radio.
Yep.
Probably the only other one of its time that was international versing Australians was Johnny Farnham's version of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head was on at the same time as B.J. Thomas, and that was tied in with the Academy Awards and what was it, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And a few weeks ago we spoke with Evie Von Bibra from the Shantuzis, and they completely accidentally recorded He's Going to Step on You Again at the same time as the Party Boys, and they were both in the top 40 at the same time.
Okay, that's interesting. Have you guys seen the John Farnham movie? Or?
Yes, I have, Margaret, and it was. I am happy to admit that I'm a bit of a softie, and and that movie, that documentary, whatever you like to call it, left me emotionally drained, if you like. It was sensational, and there was so much that I learnt behind the scenes stuff that I guess you would have lived a lot. The stuff that happened backstage in the industry that people may never know about, there was a lot of that came out. It was quite confronting.
Me too. Oh, I took like a baby, don't worry.
Yeah.
It was fantastic, yeah. I recommend anyone. In fact, I saw an ad on telly last night. It's actually going to be on Channel 7, I think, next Monday night.
Yeah, and I will be lining up again for that, without doubt. I could easily see that again. And
this one comes with the bonus ads every 7 minutes. That'll be good fun.
We had Jeff Cox on recently also talking about his time with the Little River Band, and they fronted up in all around America and Canada and performed just this wonderful, wonderful block of music. But behind the scenes there was the personality clashes. We knew that John Farnham lived through that in his time. We've talked about the Eagles, the band breaking up, and now they don't talk to each other. That stuff goes on. Was there any of that sort of anger, animosity, nastiness, bitterness behind the scenes when you were at that level?
No, not really. The boys got their nose, in the band got their nose a bit out of joint with Mockingbird because I used to sing all night with the band as their female singer, and he sort of pulled me out to work as my own act, because then he built the show. So the band would go on and do the dance music, and then I'd come on and do a floor show, and then he'd come on and do his show. And they got their noses a little bit out of joint, but it wasn't anything bad. It was just, just what it was, I guess. Got
over it quickly and moved on.
Yeah, and I'm still very close contact with Kevin Kerr, the guitar player through all of that, who, as I say, was my guardian angel in the early days, and yeah, we catch up regularly, so that's great.
Absolutely. Well, Margaret, we've almost run out of time. Before we go, I've got to ask you this question, and the answer is not allowed to be, it's a bit like asking which one's your favourite kid. If you could choose any singer in the world to do Mockingbird with, apart from the late, great Johnny O'Keefe, living or dead, who would you choose?
Oh, I can tell you who my favourite artist in the whole world is, but whether he would do Mockingbird, I don't know. But Stevie Wonder is my absolute favourite artist.
He'd sing that well. That's a good duet. I can hear it now.
We've got our people talking to your people right now. No, we don't. Here's a little piece of trivia for you. Stevie and I have the same birthday, although he's a lot older than I am, you understand?
Yes, of course he is.
No, his voice would have suited that song beautifully, I would have thought.
Yeah, he's quite extraordinary. I've been to see him a couple of times and just loved it. And Peter Couples does a really good Stevie Wonder show, if you ever get a chance to catch him too.
Oh, by the way, Margaret, quickly, upon reflection again, were your parents very proud of their daughter with that decision they made to let you loose?
Oh, yes. Well, my dad's chest would beat out of his heart would beat out of his chest whenever he came to a show. They loved it. They really did. They enjoyed it.
Not everybody can say their daughter has Johnny O'Keefe as the support act. Yeah. Margaret, it's been an absolute delight to get to know you on the radio this morning, and please pass on our best to Jesse and Kyle and thank them for organising the conversation. It's been an absolute delight to chat to you.
And you too.
I concur. Wonderful to meet you orderly, as they say.
Yes. I'm going to run with vocally. Thanks, Margaret. Margaret McLaren, Australian music legend. Good on you, Margaret.
Thanks, boys. Bye.
There she is.
Wow.
How good's that?
That was one of those surprises when you pop the name up. You wonder what's going to happen, but I really enjoyed that. That was just a fantastic story, and what a sensible, level-headed, well-grounded person. Clearly grew up in a household the same, with that story about her parents, so unique at the time. I mean, just imagine just saying, yeah, okay, you can go and sing in a rock and roll band, darling, no worries at all. At the age of 16.
There'll be a queue outside the headmistress's office at MLC on Monday morning.